meeting is really to just clean up what we left from our last meeting. And so I'm going to move through the agenda. We did have a request. You may have noticed that we changed some order because Senator Westman is only available for part of the time. So what I'm going to do is first item is the approval of the minutes from the November 7th meeting. I could have a motion. So moved. Thank you. Second. So motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes of the November 7th meeting. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? So the the minutes have been approved unanimously. Our next item, and I can see he can hardly wait. He's standing up and ready to go, and that is Doug Barnum, Chief Recovery Officer. And it's going to discuss ARPA and flood recovery update. And I know that some of this is just you have formalized some of the information that you gave to us orally before. And I guess there might be some information you just wanted to clarify or perhaps correct. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Doug, for this update, and appreciate your coming this afternoon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Doug Sparta, Chief Recovery Officer for the state of Vermont. And so I shared a slide deck with the committee of 30-page slides, and most of that information is just capturing what I went over in my last testimony. So the intent was, some of it was, I was running through it, it was a little bit hard to follow in the time frame, and I wanted to make sure that you had a reference to go back to later if those issues came up. So most of that slide deck is kind of capturing that historical.
Sort of formalizing your oral testimony.
Yes.
Okay. We appreciate your doing that very much. Thank you.
So there's 4 sections of the presentation. There's the state and local fiscal recovery funds, capital projects funds, FEMA COVID, and so that's a little bit new. I didn't go over the FEMA COVID numbers, but I thought they'd be interesting to the committee. And then the FEMA flood recovery efforts. So the obligation figures, the expenditures, the timelines, those are on slide 4. And trying to show, our obligated, expended, allocated, and appropriated categories, because as the committee knows, the full amount of ARPA was appropriated by the legislature. Most of it has been at least allocated by the administration. And then we have obligated and expended, and that plays into those various timelines. One piece of information here on obligated. Treasury just released an interim final rule on obligated. Actually, they did that about 2 days after the last joint fiscal committee meeting. And so it's generally good news for us, but we're still working on analyzing that. And we're going to submit at least one comment on how that could be made friendlier to Vermont.
I was just going to mention, I saw that in the report earlier today that said that, it was November 9th that it was released. And I thought, we haven't seen it. So I'm looking forward to that to see
I think
what it means.
Generally, it will reduce some pressure, but I want to make sure I properly understand it before I want to overpromise there. And I don't want to let us.
But we do know appropriated, it does not in itself work.
Right, but they did allow for some mechanism of re-obligation, which is something I was really hoping for. And I think I may have even mentioned it in my committee. I was really hoping they would do something.
Well, I'm glad your wishes came true.
It could help significantly reduce the risk. The next slide, slide 5, is on revenue loss, and that revenue loss is where we're able to take a federal program and make it function as a diverse state program. That amount of $6.7 million of revenue loss funds is still available for designation to streamline our existing programs. That's still accurate. We are running a new calculation on fiscal year 23 to see if we got any additional revenue loss capacity. I've become rather cynical of late, so I don't think the numbers are going to work out for us to get more capacity. I'm not counting on it. It would be a pleasant surprise if I was wrong. It's possible, but running the numbers in my head, I don't think we're going to get more capacity for revenue loss. Slide 6 tries to show a projection of our obligation trend lines and shows that in kind of some variance between lower and higher confidence situations, we're likely to hit our obligation threshold by the end of the year based on the current trends. There's not a lot of room for error there, but that's what that chart really shows, is that it could go in the wrong direction if we're not careful and we don't watch it. So we do need to, I am going to be pushing programs, even with the flood recovery, need other efforts to obligate aggressively and make sure that we're not scrambling in December to get everything obligated, because that leads to bad wars.
But this is December.
No.
Next year.
December
Next year.
2024, December, good catch, yes.
I just, sorry, I just,
No, that was
clear.
that was a good
Tell me it was
point of
May.
clarification. That's a good point of clarification. That deadline to obligate is next December, so basically a year and 30 days from now. And we're assuming, and basically under the Treasury guidance, the new interim final rule, it makes it clear that if you don't have something obligated by that date, you are going to send it back to Treasury. So we need to have the full dollar amount on formal obligations at that point. There's a lot of weeds and caveats to that we'll go into during the session, and I'd be happy to provide more detail, but.
And you have systems in place so that you can track that and within that period of time and
Yes.
be able
absolutely,
to.
Madam Chair.
And the person responsible for tracking that and overseeing it is you?
It is me. I was able to, I do, at the beginning of the ARPA period, we brought on one financial manager for limited service position to support me. Then we upped that to two when the Treasury reporting requirements became clear. And because of the flood, I've added a third. So I do have three financial resources that are helping me. So it's not just me doing it by
No,
myself.
I understand, but the locus of accountability is with you.
Yes, yes, I'm responsible for tracking and transmitting the message. But I haven't actually shared publicly that there are state resources that are helping me do this work, so, yeah.
Well, we're happy you have them because it sounds like you have your hands full.
Yes. The projected expenditure timeline is on slide 7. That is less optimistic and probably requires more pressure to reach our expenditure timelines than the obligation timelines. So that pressure looks like we have a slide later in the deck that show which program by program aren't expending at this point, and digging into why they're not expending. And in some cases, like A&R municipal programs, their expenditure ratio is low, and that was anticipated. So I don't want to tweak these projections for that, but I do think they are anticipated, and I do want to work with those programs and say, okay, show me what your expenditure trend line looks for your program, and I'm going to hold you to that, and make sure that we see that expenditure rate pick up in those programs. And so slide 8, it wasn't too much later. That's where we really see, like the Vermont Community Broadband Board, they were a newer organization. So we worked together with them, and they really proactively got a lot of those funds out, worked with the CUDs, and expended quite a bit of those funds. Part of that was pre-purchase of a large amount of fiber. Because of the nature of the project, they were able to expend a lot of the funds on materials, and that protects Vermont. It also was made before a great deal of inflation, so that purchase was beneficial for a number of reasons. And then A&R DEC, you can see, still has a large amount.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a really helpful page. And to follow up on what Representative Kornheiser was asking. So obviously, yes, A&R. I'm concerned, do you actually have the staffing and the capacity to do the work that needs to be done in A&R? Do you feel like you have the resources you need there? Or do they?
I believe they do. I believe they are at the edges of their administrative capacity, yes. But I have been working with them, and I have also, some of the proposals that we're working on for the session are geared at trying to give them more flexibility and relieve them of federal rules where possible, so that they can get this money out more easily.
So I'm looking at ways to streamline for A&R so that they don't have as much work. So I can't reduce the amount of money we need them to get out, but I can try to make it easier for them to distribute money.
And just to follow up, and so do you have sort of a plan B for all of these? If it looks like we're going to be not able to obligate on time, where's your sort of drop dead date? Not what the government's saying, but what you think, so that we can either reobligate or shift money around. You have some sort of plan B in the back of your head for that?
A couple, yes. But I do have one proposal that I'm working on. It's not, and it should go with the budget this year. I'm hoping that proposal will give us a foundation for the General Assembly to decide, okay, this is our approach. These are our safety measures around ARPA. I'm hoping to have that clearly established this session. And I do believe between payroll replacement and a couple of other mechanisms, I do believe I can present a construct that will protect the money.
Okay.
As I'm looking at this, I'm thinking this is going to be very helpful for committees and
Yes.
to focus and take more testimony or be following it. So there are a lot of benefits to it.
And related to this discussion, we are going to try to up our game on public transparency, create a public dashboard related to ARPA and flood recovery. We have one for CRF, and we are going to work on creating one. But we're also going to try to create an abbreviated monthly update for the money committees, so that we have monthly information on ARPA, so that you can see the trends on a more timely basis. So I want to acknowledge that's a need. We've been working with the Joint Fiscal Office on trying to meet that need. We're not quite there yet, but we have some good plans and some good progress on how to do it.
And that also means that there's another set of eyes to sort of alert us to anything that might hit a speed bump along the way, which
Absolutely.
is
We have
inevitably going to happen.
We have an administration appropriation and expenditure tracker, and we're going to, one of our measures there is reconciling it against the appropriations tracker that the Joint Fiscal Office has been keeping, so that we know we're properly identifying everything.
Other questions or keep going? Okay. Those on the screen, I don't see any hands up, so all right.
Slide 9 is, that's a restatement of the obligation expenditure at the program level. So that's two kind of, we're going to look at it from the organizational level and the program level. That program level lets us get into those case by case, why is this happening, and type of discussions a little bit more deeply. Our connection with A&R has been really close for ARPA. We've been carrying out for a while, we had a weekly meeting between Guidehouse and A&R to make sure they had everything they needed to move programs forward. And then slide 10, that shows the trend lines for different, because this isn't linear, right? And it shows some of the obligation trend lines for different agencies. And you can see A&R DCs is starting to come up. If it continues that curve, that would be great, and that would solve a good portion of our problem. I just don't want to assume that yet. So we didn't build in any exponential growth or any positive curves. We just did a linear forecast on those previous slides. And then slide 11, the expenditure progress for the top 6 agencies. I think that's, we'll leave that for reference. That's showing again some lumpiness, some seasonality in some of these programs.
I just want to, while the overall speed of the expenditures is not necessarily reassuring, having this dashboard and having you share it with us and knowing how you're going to use it is incredibly reassuring. Thanks.
I apologize for not presenting this.
No worries. Thank you for providing it now.
So slide 12, again, progress on obligations by organization. Slide 15, getting into the same thing with expenditures. So these tools, we're going to keep something similar to this updated. It may not look exactly like this stuff, but these are the points we're really looking at. And then slide 14 just has some of the key points that I've been talking about so far. Capital Projects Fund, $113 million specific to broadband. That's slide 16 is starting on. 95 million at CDB, who has a good track record so far of getting money out the door. It helps that it's very expensive, but.
Well, that's the good news. The bad news, it's very expensive.
But they are really seeing a lot, they are seeing measures.
They're moving it
in
out, yeah.
households, like, they are seeing results. It is, the state's parks project has become a subset from a treasury perspective of that larger broadband project. It's moving forward, and the library's capital project, I just approved the application and rating structure, scoring structure for those projects, which they're going to take it's the Department of Libraries, so their scoring rubric is very detailed and very thoughtful. They're also going to score the awards in each region of the state against each other so that we don't over-concentrate our awards in any one region. So as expected from a group of librarians, they have a very, very thoughtful, very rigorous approach. And luckily, the application was somewhat easy, so they're putting more.
I love those librarians, Representative Wood.
In general, what can those funds be used for? What can local libraries be applying for?
So the nice thing there is that because libraries are treated as an access to broadband for community members, it can be used for nearly anything within the envelope of that library. It can be used for roof repairs, ADA, American with Disability Act. Requirement for repairs. It can be used for broadband infrastructure, but most of these libraries are no longer putting in hard wiring. They're mostly going with Wi-Fi at this point. So they're getting the connection from their ISP. A lot of this money will go into making sure the buildings can hold up, because there's a lot of pictures of leaking roofs, destroyed boats.
And the ADA accessibility.
The ADA accessibility is a
Big piece.
because that actually unlocks the door for future federal opportunities. Mm-hmm. Because in some cases, if you have enough ADA problems, it rules you out from certain programs.
And many of our libraries are historic buildings and. Yes.
So I apologize, I know I'm speaking quickly this.
No, it's
I know.
But it's the end of a long day. I just did a lot of stuff, so I want to make sure you.
It's been a long day for you and for everybody around the table and around the wall here. Okay, we'll keep moving to 18 then.
Slide 18, this is an overview of what happened with COVID FEMA. I realized I don't think I ever came in and presented on this. But FEMA obligated $462 million. I think we are actually close to that number, even though just under $500 million. That project submissions is $499 million, is very close to being fully obligated. So FEMA COVID, we actually moved much, much more quickly than on any previous disaster with FEMA. That was partly due to the structure we created with Guidehouse. They've helped us get in really clean and really persuasive applications to FEMA and get more money funded out of FEMA and also reduce our risk rates. So this overview slide shows how big of a financial event FEMA was. Of course, most of that is at 100%. A very small portion of that money, about 35 million or so, was at 90% reimbursement rate. So unlike most disasters, we're not looking at $50 million match. We're looking at ended up about $3.5 million match for that event. Slide 19, moving on to flooding on slide 20. Definitely not going to go over this because I just went over something like this. I would just say this deck is more detailed and designed for the Joint Fiscal Committee. So it's a little bit more in the weeds than the all-member briefing, and has a little bit more of the financials broken out in there. I would say because things are changing so quickly, slide 22 doesn't actually have some of the major damage elements that brought us up over $500 million. Those were added in just a couple of days ago. So slide 22 should have a total of over $500 million. I think the capital complex damage was approximately 280 in the current damage inventory. So the capital complex damage in Montpelier is about half of the public assistance damage cost. That's a preliminary figure. Insurance hasn't been backed out of that, but that's based on work with HP Cummings by BGS and the current flood codes of what it would take to repair and mitigate those structures.
So this is where we are today in terms of monthly or routine updates to the information here. Is that part of what you'll be working with joint fiscal? In other words, we're looking at, for example, as of a certain date, the world is going to be constantly changing what's here. I was just wondering, how do we sort of get current on sort of the, progress from December to, say, the 1st of March, over, would this be monthly, or is that something that you're working with joint JFO in terms of
Yes.
how information might get provided to us?
Our information will be updated more holistically on a quarterly basis.
Quarterly.
And then there'll be key data points we try to update on a monthly basis. That'll be part of that picture. And I acknowledge that during the session, that data will be updated monthly, but if I might be flagging things during the session and communicating more frequently even on a monthly basis. Because this session is really when the rubber hits the road as far as ARPA. The last 2 years have been program building. They've been very successful. We're designed at this point. We need to protect ourselves as a state from the end of the calendar year and then make sure that we're on a good glide path for 25 and 26.
You said ARPA, but I don't think you meant ARPA.
Oh, sorry, I meant ARPA in this case. So the data flow for the FEMA COVID information, we do get our FEMA data more frequently than once a month. So FEMA COVID data, that can be included in monthly updates and,
No, I meant you just said that when this slide, you said something about the ARPA, and I don't think he means, this is the PA or the FEMA. I think he meant FEMA. No, that's all right. I just wanted the world, if they.
timeline.
Yeah.
But yes, the FEMA data, we will include it as a package so that it's all tied together, right? I don't know how long we need to include the FEMA COVID data for you. That's more of this is how this went, and it's, the financial impact of it is minimal at this point. And then the last thing I wanted to say, I know I'm about a minute over right now, is I was a little bit rushed in my reference to the disaster case management process and where we were with Capstone and what the timelines were. Capstone has been recruiting and training to the best of their abilities. They've been working with us on software. We're working with Capstone, SEPCA, and some other partners. And we're trying to transition from our bridge case managers to Capstone and other partners over the course of December. And they should be looking at January for them to be able to provide those more detailed case management services. So we are maintaining connections with people in December through our bridge case managers, but those bridge case managers still aren't providing full disaster case management services. And we've talked with FEMA about people who need appeal support and aren't currently getting it. And at this point, they are still telling us, and we've gotten this in writing, I believe, that if there's extenuating circumstances for an appeal and for information, that 60-day timer on an appeal is not hard and fast. They can reopen an appeal if, like when someone gets contractor invoices 90 days after their award, they do have processes for that. So we're going to
I don't know who I am
try to make sure people don't fall into the cracks there.
literally.
Especially not there.
So I just wanted to share that I was rushed and imprecise when I referred to the disaster case management last time.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you for the additional information you submitted to Joint Fiscal Office today. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for coming in. Other questions, or I think people can, after we're done, look at this, and it's really great for the beginning of the session too. So I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot more of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure you're looking forward to it.
Any data points you might need to try to add to that package, if you see things that you might want to know, I can look at trying to improve that package. It's certainly not fixed.
Well, it's a great job.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
I'm going to move on to the reason that we scheduled this meeting, and that's the basic needs budget methodology. And we have Patrick Titterton here. We have really within the recommendations, some are fairly straightforward too, relate to the need for statutory change, and recommendation number 7 I'm going to maybe have Patrick explain it a little more, but based on reading it, it looks as though, in fact, the household configuration, although we could act on it, really adds a dimension and relates to the two statutory changes. So you might want to just run through some of the ones that kind of are straightforward, cell phone versus this, and then we can look at number 7 relative to the other 2 recommendations that in fact would require a change in current statute. So if you could do that for us, I think that would be helpful. I'm sure people have had a chance to look at it in a little more detail since our last meeting. So thank you, Patrick, and we'll probably work from this document then, which is kind of the summary from the larger. So.
Yeah. So Patrick Jacobson, Joint Fiscal Office. There are, for those of you on the computer, there's 2 documents posted to the website. One is the full report, and the second one is a memo from the chair of this technical advisory committee, with Senator Clarkson. As your chair said, that this basically just walks through the summary, and I'll work off this document for now.
Okay.
So in total, there were 7 recommendations that the Joint Fiscal the first being food, and I'll try and go through these succinctly because I know you've heard them already. So for food, what we use USDA data, which breaks it down. They provide available budgets for males, females, and children, varied by age. Currently, for the single adult households, the assumption used in the report is that adult is a female. Most single parents, about 80% in the state, are female. But when you talk about just a single person living by themselves, the split is much more even. So the recommendation there is, instead of just using that budget for female, we shift instead to averaging between the male and female budgets. So the male budget's a little bit higher than the female. Overall, it's not a huge change, but it would result in a slight increase. The second, relating to food, because the USDA reports their data on a national level, we make an adjustment using the Consumer Expenditure Survey to make that more specific to Vermont. So what we've done in the past is you look at the 10-year average differential. So how much more expensive is food in the Northeast region compared to nationally? And what we've seen recently is, the last few years, the Northeast has been seeing higher and higher food costs compared to nationally. So just as a way to get that more current date, the committee recommended going with a 5-year average instead. So that is the first recommendation. The second recommendation is probably the simplest. It's really just affirming the decision to include the child care subsidies. I think if anyone had been silent on it, we would have been sort of up to our own devices to decide. But really what this is asking is just to affirm the use of those child care subsidies. And while it's probably the most simple recommendation, it does have the most, by far the biggest impact on those family configurations with kids.
That's a good question.
Yes.
Can you just explain for me, what's the difference between consideration of it as a public good versus public assistance?
Well, really what that hinged on was, because those subsidies go all the way up to the 575th percentile or above federal poverty, all of the incomes that we're calculating in this report fall within that range.
Gotcha.
So there's nobody earning enough not to qualify for the subsidies in that report.
It is good. We did a thing.
Take a moment to enjoy that.
But thank you for asking that, clarifying. 3, unless there are further questions on childcare?
In 3, so we use the Consumer Expenditure Survey again to look at household expenses and clothing. And so one thing we back out of that are miscellaneous equipment. This is a lot of things that, because we're assuming these people are renters, that we're assuming the landlord should be providing to them. But, in backing that out, what we're accidentally doing is backing out the cost of a computer, which I think everyone really relies on that. So the recommended methodology is to take the basic cost of sort of a base level laptop and amortize that over a 3-year period. So it's adding, I think, maybe $15 a month.
Representative Shapiro.
I was surprised that the amortization was only 3 years. I'm
know,
sure
it's-
I should not get a computer every 3 years. I was expecting it would be 5, and I just wonder if there's what the reasoning was behind that.
So the committee looked at both a 3-year and 5-year amortization schedule. And really the spread that you were looking at in that was about $5 a month. So it was not a incredibly significant amount. I just think that the committee felt that in, an instance where you drop and crack it or you spill water on it, that it's, especially if in your home with kids, it can be a high hazard item to have laying around. So it was a decision they made. It doesn't make a significant impact in the overall budgets that we calculate.
Harrison?
Yeah, I was gonna ask the same thing. This computer here is 5 to 6 years old. And I went in yesterday to my computer guy that I periodically will, and they did a tune-up, and he says, you're good for another 2 years before it's outdated. Now, that's probably stretch it, but I'm, senior on fixed income, so I'm a little frugal, but 3 years.
You're on record.
I am. And I didn't even buy our chair
Coffee.
I don't know. Computer is important. And I would agree that it needs to be included, but 3 years seem like a luxury.
I think the point about households with children in them running through electronics faster is one that I have certainly lived.
Are you saying
with.
I don't use this very fast?
No, you're elderly and
I mean,
reading on it.
and the use of, a teenager with a laptop going back and forth from school. Also less expensive laptops actually tend to not last as long.
Looks like it's not even.
But either way, I think it's not, I'm going to trust the committee that spent a lot more time on this than.
So I guess
Yeah.
other comments, I mean, you can debate it, and obviously the committee debated it and came down with 3, and we know that depending on circumstances, it's more, the question is, for the modest amount that it makes, we ultimately can make our own decision, but I think we'll keep going then.
Sure, and just the one other little nugget I'd provide on that topic is that this approach only covers the physical hardware costs. So like you said, you brought it in to get tuned up. That's not included in here, which, kind of feeds into the maybe more aggressive amortization schedule.
So what you gain one place, you're,
Yeah.
does that help you? Your ill-defined anxiety, Representative Harrison?
$95.
New breaks. All right, we're on to telecommunications
Yes.
now.
So the current methodology, we use a CPC survey, which shows the mix of types of telecommunications use that people have. So it's a blended average between the cost for cell phones and landlines, or people who have both. Because landlines are so much cheaper than cell phones, what this does is it depresses that budget a little bit. It's very small, the amount that we're talking about, but with the proliferation of cell phones as sort of the most widely used form of communication, the committee felt that that shift was appropriate. So that's for telecommunications. Number 5, which is personal expenses. The first recommendation was to rename that miscellaneous expenses, which will make sense when we move on to number 6. But the second one relating to this is on that page now. So I guess a quick little backstory here. In 1999, when this report was first written, there was an assumption that people would have $2 per day for adults and $1 per day for children, and just for the types of expenses that don't fit into your, normal everyday budget or, set categories, right? And so that was grown by inflation every year. Currently, in the last report, it sat at $3.50 for adults per day and $1.75 for children per day. The committee is recommending that that sort of be topped up. And so moving from $3.50 to $5 per adult, moving up to $2.50. So it's always half, right? And then, you know, just as before, growing that by inflation going forward.
Questions or comments?
And if you're good with 5, so number 6 is recommending adding a new spending category. You know, it was discovered that there is not an explicit category meant to cover personal care products. So toothpaste, shampoo, that kind of stuff. So the recommendation is to add that as a spending category, and we will be following a similar approach to what we use for clothing and household expenses, specifically using the consumer expenditure survey for that purpose. So that is the first 6. Number 7 has to do with the household configurations. And the first one is to include a new type of configuration, which is a single person in shared housing, meaning someone who lives with a roommate. And then the second one within that category, and that one also relates to a statutory change, which I'll comment on in a second. And the second recommendation is to remove the 2 adults with 2 children, but 1 wage earner household. The reason behind that was because we have these childcare subsidies. We're expecting there to be a significant convergence between the 2 adults with 2 wage earners and the 2 adults with 1 wage earner households. So the recommendation is to remove that to still sort of maintain 6 total family configurations that are in the report. So that was all of the recommendations from the committee for JFC approval.
Can I ask?
Yes.
Sorry. So I only have a little bit of a heartburn around remove, because I don't have, even though we had a moment to go do some studying, which, believe it or not, I went and did find the report to see, because our homework was to go see what the current methodologies are and what we would be changing. And I can't say I'm going to have any more time to take a look at things deeper in about a month from now, but it was really, the report itself was really well done and could follow it, so thank you. But you just brought up that there are 6 right now. And I realize that things are changing, like, you know, you look at the configurations and that we need to update to keep up with the way people, Vermonters, are living today, so that we take those into consideration. But was any thought given, my long way of getting to the question, was any thought given to actually just adding this one instead of taking one away? And I'm feeling like this needs a little more, I'm hesitant about the removing part.
And I'm hesitant about, in this environment, engaging in that kind of examination. So, and there is a nexus between recommendation 7 and configurations and the 2 statutory changes. So the other possibility is to move forward and approve the ones that we've kind of reviewed. The other, what are the implications of removing or?
Right, because he said it does relate to the statutory change, so that would make some sense. And you can tell me if I'm just being a little too cautious, but.
And which committee would have the jurisdiction over?
General.
General? Right. Well, it's wage. I don't know in the past.
I think historically it's been House General, at least in the House. I don't know what the Senate did.
Okay. Mike?
I think it'd be a housing economic development, general.
It wouldn't be commerce then?
Historically, no.
No. Okay.
And I am also sort of, I want to dive in much deeper to this if I have to make a decision about it, the 7th one. And I know that that's sort of, this is not the appropriate place for digging in deep to census data.
Let that more in.
That is a committee, that is a policy
process.
committee should be digging into census data and continuing to ask you multiple questions.
Yeah. So if
we could move forward.
6, that leaves 7, the 2 adults, 2 children, 1 wage earner stays in. But the adult, the single adult in a shared roommate thing doesn't go in.
Well, what it means is we're not going to take an official position. What we're recommending, in essence, is that when we're looking at the two recommended statutory changes, that the removal or the addition
change, yeah.
would be part of that whole consideration by the policy committee, as opposed to this committee.
So it's not like it won't get done,
Done.
but it looks like we'll be able to have them
Okay.
do more digging.
So, and I agree with what's been said on this. The other statutory change wasn't listed as number 8 on the urban versus rural. And I didn't know if you were going to go over that or not, but I did have a question as to how we're defining urban and how we're defining rural.
So, if I can take the first part of the question first. So there were 2 statutory recommendations, meaning that it's not something that this committee could simply approve. It has to be dealt with in the General Assembly. The first of which related to that recommendation for you all, number 7, was to make the basis of the official livable wage based on that single person shared housing. Currently, where it's a 2-adult household, which would make the assumption that they're married or cohabitating.
Oh, my
So it
I
has
thought they were
implications on housing.
Sorry. Not today.
On housing and taxes and some other categories. But that specific recommendation to make that the official one has to be dealt with a bill, through the body. So that's how it relates to number 7. Now, if there was a bill that goes through,
Fighting through the door and find under the table.
What?
I think somebody's playing with the bells upstairs.
We're just all gonna vote.
Well, the voting.
There will be a roll call,
A few
but-
minutes ago, and then you had a roll call.
Jim, this is for you to get ready.
So how does the second statutory change?
the second one is, so currently we do all these calculations. We do a urban one and a rural one for every single category or family configuration. How is it defined? So we're kind of limited sometimes with how, federal agencies will report data. Loosely speaking, Chittenden County or the Burlington MSA is how we're defining urban, and then the rest of the state, we're considering rural.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was hoping that was the answer.
Yes.
Good. So, other comments, but I think people are, based on the comments, would feel more comfortable that anything to do with the household configurations and the nexus that exists between the statutory changes that need to be made, that we would set that aside and feel that the proper place to act on that would be the policy committee, which would mean approving 1 through 6 if people feel comfortable to do that today, which is within our authority. So
That sounds great.
Would you like a motion, ma'am?
I certainly would, considering the hour.
Okay. Well, then I can do that. So I'd like to move, and I move to approve the changes to assumptions and methodology for the food, childcare, clothing, and childcare, clothing, and household expenses, telecommunications, personal expenses, and personal care product components as recommended by the Basic Needs Technical Advisory Committee for the Basic Needs Budgets in accordance with 2 VSA 526D as outlined in memo presented to the committee on November 7th, 2023.
That is a long
Did I get it?
sentence, a motion. But we have a motion and a second from Senator Cummings. Is there further discussion? Any hands up on the screen? Don't see any. So unless there's further discussion, I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Okay, Senator Baruth.
Yes.
Okay, good. Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Harrison, yes. Representative Lamford.
Yes.
Representative Schy.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
I think he had to leave.
He disappeared.
He had to go to a meeting.
Yes, he had an appointment. So.
Okay. Representative Wood,
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser,
Yes.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Okay, so the vote is 9-0-1.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick. Appreciate it. Now, we're not too far off schedule, and we have Julia Richter here. Obviously, the December 1st education tax rate letter has received a lot of attention. Representative Kornheiser, you were interviewed and on the news last night.
I was indeed, and the letter coming out a day earlier than December 1st certainly put a little bit of a crimp in some things, but we are barreling forward, and I'm glad that Julia's here to sort of do some level setting for us.
What we thought we would do in light of the letter being received is just make sure you had a copy, and for Julia to give us sort of the context of where we are in the process. And it's no official, but it's to really give this committee the opportunity to sort of get reminded in terms of the process and the work that you've been doing as well on the whole issue of education tax rates. So thank you, Julia.
Yeah, sure. So for the record, I'm Julia Richter with the Fiscal Office. There should be 2 documents in front of you. They're also posted online. There's the education tax rate letter, which is a ministerial letter published every year from the Commissioner of Taxes. I'll talk a little bit more about that. There's also the Education Fund Outlook, which is a consensus document for the board from the Joint Fiscal Office to reflect the modeling that's been presented in the December 1st letter. So really big picture, the calculations that are done in the December 1st letter are prescribed in statute with information that is available to date. So there's a lot of assumptions going in here. And it's spelled out in 32 DSA how the calculations and modeling need to be conducted. Some of these requirements include that the average tax bill needs to change uniformly across all 3 classes, the non-homestead, homestead, and income, that all unreserved and unallocated funds are used to lower tax rates, and that the funds that the legislature set aside last year to lower tax rates are also included in that modeling. I really want to emphasize that this is really a ministerial a ministerial process. It's really to start the education fund deliberations. It does not mean that these will be the tax rates or tax bills. We have to model, given the information we have available, to really level set, to start the conversation in terms of what will happen in the education fund. Over the course of the session, we'll have more data coming. There will be policy decisions and analysis performed to determine what the yields and rates will be, how the different tax classes will move.
And what actual budgets will look like.
What actual budgets will look like, spending decisions, grand list growth. We'll have a new revenue forecast in January, lots of data adjustments.
So in summary, this is preliminary, lots of moving pieces, and it's far from the final rate. So Representative Harrison.
Just a quick question. Where does the 12% assumption on increased spending come from? Because no one's actually compiled a local budget yet.
Great question. Yeah, so that's an assumption, an estimate that's coming from the Agency of Education. It's from conversations with business managers, what they're hearing on the ground, what they're seeing. Comes from AOE, and as school budgets are developed and then voted in March, that will be updated moving forward. Some of the things that we have heard may be contributing to this 12% increase in education spending have to do with the ending of ESSER funds, increase in healthcare benefits, collective bargaining agreements, debt service, inflation, a lot of the things that are part of the ed fund.
Okay.
2 things just to clarify. So there isn't sort of a formal survey process from the Agency of Education to school districts. It's more of a
Correct.
vibe. Okay. Better than a vibe, but less than survey. And then we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but it's sort of an interesting piece of this to me. So I just want to dig into it a little bit with you. So education spending is not the same as spending on education. And so I wonder if you could talk about that for just a moment.
Yeah, definitely. So school districts are setting their budgets, right? It's a locally approved budget, so it's put forth to voters. They need a vote on it usually at town meeting day. As Representative Kornheiser mentioned, school budgets encompass everything that the school district is spending. And then there's sort of two buckets of thinking about those budgets. There's the categorical aid that's coming directly from the feds, as well as state government. So that includes things like transportation aid, special education, universal school meals. There's prior year surpluses or deficits. And once we take away all of those things, which are referred to as offsetting revenues, the remainder is education spending. So that's what the school district primarily comprised of salaries and benefits, but that's really what the school district is spending beyond those fixed transfers in state and the federal government.
And so then it's possible that we don't know yet that school budgets are not growing as fast as the education spending is growing because we had sort of this huge loss of the federal money that's going directly to districts.
Exactly. Yeah. So when school budgets do start to come out, there will be more insight into what's actually happening in school budgets.
So the bigger issue is the extent to which ESSER funds replace ongoing base spending that has to be made up versus one time. Other comments? Otherwise,
I have a question.
yes, I'm sorry, Senator Sears, your hand is up. Yes.
Yeah, part of my question, I think you may have answered, but it would be fair to say that the 12% increase in spending is up to the voters in March?
Yes, this education spending number is reflected in school budgets. So yes, we won't know what this number is until school budgets go to voters and voters those budgets.
So the voters still have a say of whether or not there will be a 12% increase in spending.
Correct.
I mean, I just want to say this to my constituents.
Yes.
Call me or write me regarding the 18% that's projected. Secondly, the second question is, something about school construction was in the article I read, and I haven't seen the report yet, but years ago, I thought that last year there was a discussion in both House and Senate Education about school construction and who was going to be responsible for it, and should the state take that role again? And is that a separate issue?
I would say that the question, so currently school construction is paid out of the education fund through school district budgets. And that is different from what was happening back in the early 2000s when there was dedicated school construction aid. What you're referencing, I believe, is there was a school construction aid task force that was set up last year by the General Assembly. It's been meeting, it's co-chaired by the Agency of Education and the Treasurer's Office. It's been meeting this summer and fall and discussing exactly that issue, the question of how school construction should be funded, where that funding should fall, what it should look like.
Okay, so we're going to wait for the task force report then.
When is the time for that?
I believe that the report is due in mid-January.
Yeah, I thought it was so it can help inform the discussion.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's helpful, and the discussion has been helpful.
But I think your question is really important because it does, from the public perspective, it seems somehow that we unilaterally can address it, but in fact, there's a major piece here, and that is the fact that local voters ultimately will be the deciding factor in what each school budget will be, and then what that looks like in total. So I think that's kind of an important message relative to the letter and the news coverage that has occurred just in the last 24 hours.
I think that is an interesting point. So the number that we get in the December 1st letter is essentially the predictions of how all of these school districts all around the state will vote and budget. and actually leaves out the fact that we might act or not, essentially. It sort of assumes that we will act in a very prescribed way when what we first have to do is see what voters decide.
And I think that was the reason for the letter. It says, if you do this, this is what your tax rate will be, so that they knew going
Sort of putting on
in
notice.
that if everybody votes a 12% increase, this is what's going to be the impact of the tax. I think we've always assumed or hoped that they might heed that warning and come in.
And in fact, that has been the case in past examples. Some people have done some historical research that has been shared with me and in terms of what the the December letter looked like versus what the final rate.
And I think one thing that districts are grappling with, which is something similar to what we were sort of hearing about this morning when we talked about the General Assembly's budget, is that there was a huge amount of federal spending that met districts' extreme needs in the aftermath of the pandemic, and those needs of kids haven't gone away. And so districts are making really tough decisions right now about what to do about the fact that kids still have really high needs in the aftermath of the pandemic for learning loss. And the federal money, the ESSER money, isn't there anymore. And so they're going to have to make decisions based on
Mental health has come up as a major.
Huge thing.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Other questions for Julia? It is Friday afternoon, it's 4:15.
Is it Friday?
And you'll be rewarded handsomely for your additional work.
Meetings in one day.
All for the price of one.
Yeah.
All for the price of one.
So unless there are other items that need to be brought up, I'm going to exercise my authority to adjourn committee